Hello, beautiful people. My name is Emma.
And I'm MC.
And we are your hosts of the G-Forces podcast. So this past weekend was the United States Grand Prix, the USGP.
USA.
Yes. Normally we film these immediately after the race, but we had a concert that we had to go to, so we are a little bit behind, but that's totally fine. And probably better because some shit went down a couple hours after the race.
Yeah, if we had filmed it immediately, I was thinking...
we would have missed it.
We would have filmed it before we went to the concert, and we got the alert at the concert.
Exactly.
So,
lucky for you guys, we had plans that ruined our normal schedule, which ended up being the great part.
Yeah, so we'll probably deep dive into our thoughts and opinions.
We will.
And just share all that because, I'm going to be honest, and this is my hot take, and I said this to you earlier, I was a little bored. It was a little sleepy this weekend.
There was, a handful of things that happened throughout the main race, but the sprint race, it was not memorable, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's, there was a lot of talk this weekend about people's frustrations with sprint weekends. Now, remember, sprints don't happen every single weekend. And I think the drivers themselves seem bored.
Yeah, Max was like, if I were a fan, I'd be disappointed waking up on a Sunday because you already know what's going to happen. Which is wrong.
We didn't know it was going to happen, and the race was very exciting, but I don't know if it's the layout of the sprint weekend or the way they do the sprint shootout, but it just, it becomes so much to consume that...
It takes over your weekend.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we had to plan things around
so that at least one of us was watching it. Yeah. So, anyways, there's a lot that went on. There's not a lot that went on. We're going to get into all of that good stuff. I think we're going to skip over practice and we're just going to jump right into quali.
Yeah.
Because I don't even remember what happened during practice, to be honest.
I think I was working during it, to be really honest.
Anyways. Into quali we go.
I was watching it, but
Okay. Now we're going to go into quali.
Well, do we want to talk about the race first? The racetrack?
Oh my god. I forget this every time. Let's get into it, Mary Catherine.
All right. So, as we've said, this weekend was the United States Grand Prix. The United States Grand Prix is held in Austin, Texas. So, it was honestly the most Texas-themed weekend.
Very American.
Everything was cowboy boots. There was handlebar mustaches. There were legitimate longhorn...
Cows? Cattle? I don't know what the term is. We're not Texans or Southern.
We don't know our cattle. Sorry.
No, we didn't grow up in cattle farms, sorry.
So it was very American.
Yeah.
Not a bad thing, but lots of Hollywood as well.
Yes, including some recent investors.
Yes, some very recent investors. So the race official name is the Formula One Lenovo United States Grand Prix 2023. Starting to see, some of them will be sponsored by airlines. Lenovo seems to be a fan favorite.
I do need to know how much money they've invested.
I'm just curious, what else besides, what is their big...
Other than, computers?
Think that.
I wonder if they
sell
TVs.
It's, software.
They might sell software. I don't know.
It's probably so much more. But, yeah, they love sponsoring F1. So the first F1 Grand Prix happened in 2012, as well as the track opening. So not super historical in the sense of Silverstone, but newish still, I guess, in the world of tracks. It was
inspired by a lot of the tracks that we currently have.
Yeah. I will say, if any of you guys watched the footage from this one, was amazing. It was very, it almost reminded me of, a toy car circuit. Yeah. I have to say, it was, circuit-wise,
I really enjoyed the track.
Loved it. So the circuit length is 5.513 kilometers, or 3.42 miles, and something I'm starting to notice, which, yes, it took me this many episodes in Grand Prix, bear with me, guys, is that a lot of them are coming out around, the same length-ish. Obviously, there's fluctuations. Like, I've done the research for the Mexican GP already, and that is a very short track. So,
really?
like, there are fluctuations, like, no shit, but obviously the race length comes out around the same. So, the number of laps they did this weekend was 56.
In a sprint, they did 19.
Yeah, so it was a sprint weekend. They did that 19 extra laps. And then the race length was 308.405 kilometers, or 191.63 miles. The lap record for this course was recorded. I don't know. The lap record was
set in 2019.
Set, thank you. I don't know why my brain just... The lap record was recorded. In 2019, Charles Leclerc, who was with Ferrari at that point, he did one lap in 1 minute 36 seconds, 0.169, or 36.169 seconds. There we go. Yeah. I will say we were not seeing that fast at times this weekend.
Not even close.
It was probably closer to the 38, 39s.
If that. In qualifying laps.
Yeah, but we were not getting that. It was very hot temperatures this weekend. I mean, we're in Tennessee, so not degrees. Texas, but it was very hot this weekend here, and it was even hotter down in Austin. So there are 20 turns at this circuit, which I thought was, like, a lot of turns for what we've seen. I feel like we've seen, like, a lot in the, like, mid-teens. And then we have 2 DRS zones this weekend. So the first detection zone is between turns 10 and 11, and then the activation starts after turn 11, and the second DRS zone is between turns 18 and 19, and activation, as per usual, is at the last turn 20, and that's start-finish straight. So I thought it was a good circuit.
I thought it was a really enjoyable circuit to watch them drive on.
It also looked incredibly, like, spectator friendly in the sense that they had these big rolling hills. I
also don't think that this circuit favors one particular car, because each sector had a different
vibe.
So like one sector is a lot of like high speed corners, and then another sector is a lot of low speed corners, and then another is like a bit more like straights. And so if your car is really great in one thing but not in everything else, then you're not going to do that great here, or at least you're going to expect to not do that great. So I enjoyed it because it kind of evened the playing field in a sense.
Yeah. And just, like, touching on things that we're kind of adding, there was no rain this weekend.
No.
They didn't have any rain, but the wind was a huge problem.
Yes.
There were crosswinds across the circuit. Obviously, crosswinds. And you saw several drivers kind of struggling. Again, something that we noticed seeing the cars in person, they really are like toy cars.
They're small.
Not in the small sense, but just, you know, when you think of a car, you think of sturdy. And obviously with this, it's that, like...
Yeah.
It's so much more, like, it's lighter.
Yes, 100%.
So... wind was definitely a big issue this weekend. And then, it was just really hot. So the track was really hot.
I think the weather, when F1 shows the weather, I think it was like 87 or like 92 degrees or something there.
Yeah, I think the track temperature was over 100.
Yeah.
So that's where we are, the US Grand Prix, the track info. So
now we can get into quali.
Yeah, finally.
So, the excitement for quali was really mainly in Q3, I would say.
There were some upsets earlier on, too, though.
Yes and no, though. I feel like, there was upsets in the sense that there were cars that got out during Q1 that didn't make sense, that normally are stronger cars. So, both Aston Martins got out in Q1, which was, like, shocking. But I know that they had come this weekend with an upgrade package, and Fernando apparently hated it, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. Was it after qualifying that I think it was...
It might have been after quali, or I think it was after the sprint, After both Aston Martins started in the pit lane for one of the races, whether it was the sprint or the legit race.
They started in the pit lane for the legit race.
Okay, so then, after the sprint race, they changed everything.
Yeah, apparently, Fernando hated the upgrades they made after Qatar, had it on the car. In typical Fernando fashion, was like, absolutely not. And so, with the rules, him switching that up,
they had to start from the pit lane.
But that's for the race. But yeah, I think you could just see the struggle in qualifying that he was having, and the reason why he wanted to revert back to the old package was because he just, it was abysmal.
Yeah. And then both Williams were out in Q1 as well, which was upsetting for us because we love Williams. But it happens. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just frustrating because there's like a positive end to this weekend for certain people, but I think I feel the love for rookies, but I'm so frustrated for Logan's performance. And I don't know if it's just... It's a tough car. I don't know if he's just getting his footing. You know, I don't know. I want to see something.
Yeah.
And I feel like we've been waiting, and we say that every weekend. And so it's not surprising.
Yeah, and the other surprise but not surprise was Nico Hülkenberg got out during Q1. The reason why I say it was a surprise but not a surprise is I do feel like we tend to see at least one of the Haas's out in Q1. But it was a surprise that Nico was out in Q1 because he typically out-qualifies K-Mag. But also, during the practice session, the Haas's looked fast.
Well, the Haas's had brought a package, I think, specific to this race. It's their home race. And so I think they were hoping to bring this powerhouse, and I don't know what happened, but you saw them in that first practice. They were top of the board.
Yeah.
They were doing really well. There was speed that we haven't seen from the Haas all season. And then all of a sudden, they could not figure it out. And I don't know if it's just there was more tire degradation or what. I don't know the reasoning, but yeah, it was just a little...
It was a little, upsetting.
It was upsetting because you thought after practice, you were like, oh my God, the Haas, they're going to do great. Like, this is fantastic, but unfortunately, we just did not see that outcome. Yeah.
And then in Q2, the 5 people that were out were Yuki, Zhou, Valtteri, K-Mag, and Daniel Ricciardo. It is his first race back.
Yeah, we saw the return of the honey badger, Daniel Avocado. I think that, it's his 3rd, 4th time in the car.
He did 2 races, and then it was the free practice session at the Dutch Grand Prix that he hurt his hand, so...
Yeah, so, I mean, the guy is...
really his 3rd time in the car.
Yeah, he's at the beginning of his season, so, he's still figuring out the car. As we've talked about before, the AlphaTauris are notoriously difficult to drive.
And I think he's still recovering, in a sense.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, they bolted his hand together.
Yeah.
So...
And then Q3, I didn't write down everyone who got out in Q3. I just wrote the top 3 / one other person. So Q3 was wild because Charles Leclerc was setting the fastest times, and then Max went in and set an even faster time, and then track limits, he went over them, and it was deleted, and it was kind of like... exciting, not exciting for Max, exciting for everybody else, because then it was going to be a real fight to see if people had the pace to keep him behind on Sunday.
Well, and I think the irony of it, too, was, like, track limits had been such a huge problem for other people the prior weekend, and it was something that you saw... we saw it when we were watching F1 Academy. We saw they were struggling track limits at COTA. We saw a few of the others. I mean, some of them got penalties in the race during the F1 race. Yes. And so track limits were another theme again this weekend.
I think the FIA have just really decided to focus on it.
Yeah. I mean, if that's what they want to focus on, then fine. But
the top 3 finishers in Q3 were Charles on pole, Lando P2, and Lewis P3. And then Max ended up starting 6th, so he had to get past 5 cars who were not going to let him pass as hard as possible, so...
Well, and I think that's the thing is that quali happens. You have Max now starting in P6.
And you get to see him fight.
But then we have the sprint, and the sprint was just...
Yeah.
It was expected. And so I think while qualifying set us up for a really exciting race, we now had a whole extra day we had to wait to see this.
Yeah.
And on top of it, I'm sure there's data and there's strategies that Red Bull is learning during the sprint that other teams are doing.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know. I was excited that he was starting back just because I have no hate towards Max. I just want to see what he can do.
Yeah.
He has a fast car. He's always at the front of the pack, but he never has people on his coattails.
Especially because when we started watching F1, he was always in the front.
I mean, when we started watching F1, it was the middle of the season, and he was 20-plus seconds ahead of everyone.
Yeah.
I mean, the gaps were ridiculous. They weren't even showing him on the TV when we started watching because he was so far gone.
He was saying to GP, we should stop to let the pit crew practice. He was so far ahead.
So... Yeah. It makes for a toss-up.
It does, definitely. But next is the sprint shootout, because Saturday was just an entire sprint day. So we're going to talk about the sprint shootout. So speaking of Max...
well, just so everyone knows, which is on me, it is the first time it's happened since we started the podcast. It's actually, no lie, or what do the Kardashians say, Bible.
Bible.
I had a hair appointment, and I missed the sprint shootout, and I didn't watch it, because I didn't want to.
I watched it.
And not because it was, a lack of F1 passion. It was just, I got home, and then the sprint started.
Well, and you had other things you had to do.
Yeah. So... I will comment because I've seen all of the TikTok clips.
So Max actually, I believe it was during the sprint shootout, from what I could find, because I didn't take notes while the races were happening this weekend for some reason, which I really regret. But Max actually spun out during a lap while we were watching this sprint shootout, and the amount of TikToks of him spinning out with helicopter noises.
Oh my god, I know.
It's really funny. But it was the smoothest save I've ever seen before. It was bro just spun once and then back onto the track.
Well, he spun out, and then I think during practice, Oscar Piastri also spun out.
Oh, yeah.
But so a few of them spun out, but they caught themselves.
Yeah.
Which I guess is great, because
great coordination.
Then the crews don't have to deal with the wreck or anything, but
I just thought that was funny. We had to add that in because it was really entertaining to watch, actually.
Yeah, there's lots of memes about Max spinning out.
Yeah. But during the sprint shootout for Q1, it's sprint shootout 1, whatever it is. Like Oscar said at whatever Grand Prix that he ended up winning, he was like, whatever this one is.
No, it was the first time he, podiumed.
But it was in a sprint.
And he's like, I don't know what this is, but I guess it's the first time I've done it.
When in Q1, we saw Nico, K-Mag, Valtteri, Yuki, and Logan out. Something happened with Yuki where I think he got impeded, so he ended up not being able to finish his, last lap or something. And he was livid over
I think he was dealing with traffic, right?
I think so, yeah.
Excuse me.
But... yeah, both Haas's being out, again, another disappointment probably for them. So, yeah. And then in Q2 of the sprint shootout, we saw Danny, Fernando, Esteban, Lance, and Zhou. So both Aston Martins were able to make it to Q2, at least, but not further than that. And then Danny was able to move a little bit further on and get... 11th in the grid. I keep looking to you, expecting you to add something.
I didn't watch it.
Okay. Q3.
I'm sorry.
So the top 3 finishers for that. Shocker. Max got pole. I'm so surprised.
I'm surprised. I didn't know until now.
Yes, you did. You watched. Did you even watch the sprint with me?
I did.
Okay. Anyways, on pole was Max, and then Charles, and then Lewis. And then George actually later on that day got a 3-place grid penalty, and so he ended up starting 11th. So a bunch of people ended up moving up on the grid because of that. So Danny actually ended up starting in 10th, which was very exciting. I don't really have much more to add to that because
it's a sprint shootout.
Yeah. So,
it's just qualifying for 2.
Yeah. Let's get into the sprint.
Yeah.
The start of the sprint really irritated me so much.
It was so catty.
It's bad when almost every pundit is like, Max, the FIA might have to investigate your first lap.
If cars could stiff arm people,
that's what
Max's car would have stiff armed Charles.
Yeah. So during the first lap of races, the stewards just kind of let them race.
Yeah, this is something the pundits were talking about that I guess, we're new, so no one talks about it because it's not talked about. But apparently, the first lap is the lap where things,
you can get away with some shit.
They're loosey-goosey. The grid is spreading out. Everyone's
they can all be assholes
used,
to each other. You kind of get away with
it's
it.
It's like a warm-up lap, but it's not. And so, apparently, it's just an unspoken rule on the track and in the paddock that things don't really start counting until the second lap.
Yeah. So, off the start in the sprint, Max kind of shoves Charles practically almost into the pit lane, all the way into the turn, and it almost looked like he was going to go off the track. And watching it at home, it was like, I know you want to get out ahead, but this was not the way to do it, bro.
Well, because if the pit lane hadn't been there, the way the start is, it coincides next to the pit, and so the pit lane is very, there's excess track on the side for this pit lane. If it wasn't there, if it was just a regular part of the track, Charles would have been
fine
in the grass.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he wouldn't have been fine. He would have been pushed off the track.
He would have been in the ditch.
Yeah, and so I'm sure if there wasn't a pit lane, Max wouldn't have pushed as far. But it was dude.
It was a little shady.
I also wonder if this is the beginning signs of that, stress of all the other cars catching up. Of, that I need to defend.
Yeah, I wonder. We didn't watch Max when he wasn't winning. And we weren't watching the 2021 season when him and Lewis were at each other's throats the whole time. And so I don't know what it's like to see Max under the stress
Max
of the
have to
potential
fight.
Not winning. And so for us, seeing that, it almost seems like the moment of oh my gosh, someone who got pole over me yesterday is starting right next to me. I need to get out ahead of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but yeah, that was the start, and it was a little crazy. But, right after that, Charles just did not have the pace to keep up with Max, and Lewis passed him almost right away. And
the Mercedes was
on fire this weekend.
Well, Lewis.
Yes.
George didn't have a bad performance.
It wasn't great, it wasn't bad.
Yeah, I will say Lewis.
Lewis seemed like Lewis again.
Lewis was ready for...
Lewis was hungry.
Yeah.
And it was exciting to watch. So, Lewis was in DRS range of Max for the first 6 out of the 19 laps. Because, again, remember, the sprint is only 19 laps. But within 1 second for 6 laps...
Unheard of.
The Mercedes
recently.
hasn't been able to do that for how many years? Since 2021. So, 2 seasons.
It's also the fact that it was the Mercedes doing it, not the McLaren.
Exactly.
Because for the last few races, the McLaren has been this rocket ship, and Mercedes has been good. They haven't been bad, but
they haven't been McLaren.
They haven't been McLaren, so to see Lewis, to see Mercedes, whatever the hell they did to this car.
It's a new floor, I think.
Yeah.
They're testing it for next year.
Yeah.
Which is exciting.
So, hey.
Next year is going to be a good year, I think. It's going to be a lot of battles on the track. What?
Is that your prediction?
That is my prediction. I think it's going to be a good year. Next year, I don't think we're going to know who's going to be world champion until closer to the end of the season.
I hope.
Yeah. Anyways. So, also, just so everyone knows, Carlos started the sprint on softs, and then everybody else was on mediums. I don't really know where they were going with the softs and everybody else on mediums.
I don't know. Maybe Carlos looks like the sacrificial lamb this weekend.
I did see a post-race interview with Carlos where he was like, yeah, we thought it was a good idea until we got out there and we saw everybody else was on mediums and was like, oh, we made a mistake.
I mean, maybe they were testing it out for race day. Maybe they were trying to figure out a bigger game plan, but I don't know why they had Charles.
The track was like 100 degrees.
I don't know why they had him on softs and Charles on mediums. It just kind of seemed weird.
Yeah, especially when literally every other person was on mediums.
Yeah, I don't know what it's Ferrari, so we never know. But I don't know what their game plan was.
Yeah. So then Oscar was also being passed like a lot, which was a little upsetting to watch because we love Oscar. We want him to succeed and do well. And so watching him get passed a lot was like, oh, come on.
Yeah, he had an off weekend this weekend.
Yeah.
You know, it just seemed like...
It wasn't a bad weekend performance-wise. No. It wasn't like the outstanding weekends he's had.
No, it just seemed like he couldn't catch a break. It just seemed like his car, he was having issues with the car. You know, he has his incident in the race. We'll talk about that later, but...
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. He just had an off weekend. Someone who we've seen, obviously, do really freaking well.
Yeah.
So...
But with that, George early on was able to pass Oscar, but he actually got a 5-second penalty for leaving the track. So that ended up pushing, I think it was Pierre into the top 8. Nothing else happened during the sprint, to be honest, after that. It was just...
It was tame.
Race to the end, and that was it.
Yeah.
I was quite bored. And we had a friend who's not an F1 fan watching it with us, and I was like, I'm sorry, this is not a normal Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, compared to last weekend, or 2 weekends ago, when we were dealing with, 3 laps of actual racing.
Yeah, when Oscar won.
And you know, maybe it's a good thing that there weren't crashes. Maybe it's a good thing, you know, we have this triple header. It's a lot of stress on the teams. I just more wanted a battle. But yeah, it just seemed like certain times people were passing, they were just letting them pass, I don't know, it just
sometimes it's smarter, though, to just let people pass, because it's not worth the fight.
And maybe that's it. Maybe the points are getting closer, and
I don't think people want to risk crashing
on a sprint
and not be able to race during the race.
True.
So the top 3 for the sprint race, Max was in first, Lewis in P2, and then Charles in P3. The gap between Lewis and Max ended up being about 9.4 seconds. And then the gap between Max and Charles, so first and third, was about 17.987 seconds.
That's a huge gap between Mercedes and Ferrari, too, though.
Yeah.
That is a huge gap.
I think what caused all the gaps during this race was the tire degradation, because you weren't going to stop to pit in 19 laps. So.
Yeah, and the Ferrari struggled with that tire degradation this weekend.
Oh, yeah. So, that was really the sprint. Nothing crazy happened. Pretty average race.
Easy points.
Yeah.
I feel like
for Max, easy. Easy points.
Yeah.
So, the race was a lot more exciting, so we're going to talk about that next.
Yeah?
Unlike the sprint, in the actual race, Max was not hot off the start.
Yeah, so he started
because he was in 6th.
So he started in that 6th position, but not everyone started on the grid.
Oh, yeah. Both Haas's and both Aston Martins.
Yeah, they all started in
the pit
lane, but there was rumors that Lance might not have started in the pit lane.
He, after the formation lap, drove up to the spot on the grid and then had to get wheeled back into the pit.
Oh, okay, so he didn't actually...
No.
Yeah,
no.
Homeboy forgot where he is.
No, there's photos of his crew wheeling him back into the pit lane.
Poor guy.
It happens.
Yeah, so with that, was it Logan Sargent got moved up to, like, the 16th place.
Yeah,
like, they
16th
got
or
moved
something.
up to, like, certain spots in the grid. But, yeah, and then Max is in that 6th place.
Yeah. So Charles is on pole, and Lando was in P2. And Lando was just, like, off the start, ready to go.
It was Lando's 100th race weekend.
Yes.
I think it was also George's.
Yes.
And I think, after seeing Oscar do really well,
he wants that win.
He wants the win. And I think
I thought he was going to get it.
I think he saw an opportunity. There's not a lot of chances right now.
No.
There's not a lot of chances that you're going to have Max starting in 6th.
Yeah.
And so, take it where you can.
Yeah. So he was really hot off the start. And then Lewis ended up taking second from Charles on lap 6. So Lando was still ahead. And he was actually creating, like a 3 or 4 second gap at this point. Between him and second place.
Yeah, I mean, he was keeping it steady. The one thing that we didn't talk about before we started getting into the details was the fact that there was talk about making this a one-stop race.
Oh, yeah.
And so there was a really funny interview that you guys, I'm sure, will go look up, but Pierre Gasly post-race apparently was unaware that some of the guys were thinking of doing a one-stop race. Did not have that in his plan. He was like, we were already getting set up to do, I think,
a two-stop race.
The formation lap, and George comes up to him.
No, it was Charles.
It was Charles?
Charles went up to him and was like, so, are you going to do a one-stop race? And he was like...
No, I thought it was George.
No, it was Charles. And Pierre... Because they're, like, best friends. Okay. So it makes sense. But Pierre was like, absolutely not. Why would I do that? That makes no sense.
Yeah, but we started to see Lando doing well. I mean, what did he start on? He
started on mediums. A lot of them started on mediums, I'd say, and there was a handful on hards. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the people who wanted to do a one-stop, I think were trying to push those mediums till lap, 23-ish, but it wasn't possible. Like, a bunch of them went in on, lap 18 and lap 19. I know Lewis went in on lap 21 because he was like, I can't drive any longer.
Yeah, and you could see that, especially in that first pit stop, a lot of the decisions were based off of what Max was doing.
Yeah.
A lot of the decisions were based off of when Red Bull was going to... this literally became a strategy game with the time.
Yeah. I feel like it was everyone against Max and Red Bull. Just whoever could beat him was trying to do that.
Yeah.
So, and then right after Lewis took over Charles's spot in second, Esteban had to retire because off the start, Esteban and Oscar actually collided. So it was Esteban's side pod that ended up having some damage. And then I can't remember what was wrong with Oscar's car.
I think it was a similar issue.
Maybe.
Because if you look at the footage, you just see Oscar's right rear and then hits Esteban's side pod and then Esteban's left front tire.
Ah, okay.
So it's like they hit perfectly.
Yeah.
And I think after that, they hit those.
Over.
Yeah.
So, unfortunate weekend again for Esteban having to retire again. And
especially after all the Alpine announcements.
Oh, yeah, because they had all of those huge investors.
Yeah, there's a huge sports group of investors, including Travis Kelce, Mahomes, all those guys, and they're investing into Alpine. And so it was a little bit of a bummer to know that, these guys that just invested into the team, but it's also the risk you take with Formula One. So
well, and when a start happens, there is almost a guarantee that one person's gonna have damage.
Yeah.
I feel like in every single race we've seen, someone have damage.
Yeah.
So, anyways, then on around lap 19, we see Lando and a few others pit. So I think Max pitted around lap 18. So they all went for Lando went for new hards. I think Max went for new mediums. Mm-hmm. Lewis went for new hards. The reason why those are the people that I'm mentioning is because those are the main people in the fight for the win of the race. And then this is when we all really figured out that Charles was on a one pit stop strategy and Ferrari, I'm pretty sure, has even admitted, like, this is what ruined his race. And I'm pretty sure, I saw a TikTok earlier today that was someone of looking at the data of Lewis and Charles, and if they had pitted at specific times, if Charles had done 2 pit stops, their pace was good enough to possibly keep up with Max, if not beat him, which sucks. Especially knowing what happened later on Sunday. But anyways, and then we get to lap 29. That's when Max is finally able to pass Lando. Mm-hmm. This is when Lando's really starting to struggle to keep pace, I feel like.
Yeah, we saw he was probably the most front-running guy. We saw having issues with the wind.
Yeah.
I think he was also just... I think the tire degradation was strong. I also just think the McLaren was not going to have the best weekend at this circuit.
They didn't expect it to be fast this weekend.
They were not expecting it to be their weekend, and so I think any level of strong performance that Lando was able to they were happy. I mean, the fact that it took Max 29 laps,
mm-hmm.
He had to get through traffic. He had to get through those, 5 other guys. But I still think it's an incredible feat. You had Lewis in the sprint being able to keep up with him for 6 laps. And you have Lando was able to stay in front of him for 29.
Yeah.
I think the next few races are going to be really interesting.
Yeah. Also, one thing to note, Max was complaining about some brake issues.
So I got frustrated when we were watching. Okay, I'll just be candid. I got really frustrated when watching the race because every single time Max they would have his radio on F1 TV, he literally would sit there and he'd be like, "My brakes, man, don't talk to me when I'm on my braking."
I'm in the braking.
I just think that it's really unfortunate that people are sitting there and they're like, well, Max didn't do so well because he's struggling with the brakes. The rest of the guys behind Max every single race, they're struggling with shit parts in their car just as same.
I feel like it's just a disgrace to the other drivers.
To sit there and be like, oh, well, and I also just think, why are you making an excuse? He's a world champion.
Every car is going to have a problem at some point.
And I don't know. I just got a little frustrated because it felt like everyone was like, oh, well, the reason why Lando stayed in front of him for 29 laps was because Max was dealing with this brake issue. Max wasn't at his top.
Lando also had problems.
Yeah, I just think, he's a world champion. He doesn't need excuses. Maybe the cars are getting faster, I don't know. I got frustrated.
I agree. I was getting frustrated with that one. So then, for a few laps, Lando was actually able to hold on to Max and be in DRS range. And at this point, we were sitting there on the couch, and I was so sad for Lando that he'd been passed by Max. But to see him keep up at the pace of Max, it was like, okay, maybe if you stay out and Max goes into pit, you should be fine. That's 20 seconds that you have that he's not going to have. But later on, at lap 34, Lando actually pits for new hards. We gasped.
We were in shock.
I was like, what's happening? Why would you pit again? But he pitted for new hards, and I think his pace stayed the same.
Yeah, I didn't see, a huge improvement. I think I was a little frustrated at I didn't expect it. It just...
No.
But again... I don't know the tire length, the tire, I don't know how long they'd already been used.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think I was shocked that he decided, because that was a lot of time he lost.
Yeah, because then on the very next lap, Max went in and pitted for new hards. And so also, just so y'all know, at this point, Lewis was still in the lead. And we thought he was going for that one-stop strategy.
Mm-hmm.
But he actually pitted at lap 38 for new mediums after being in the lead for a bit. And so we were like, oh no, did he just give up the lead? Which he kind of unfortunately did. Because then Max was able to get ahead. I think Max actually came out. You saw Max pat. I think they were hoping that Lewis was going to get out of the pit lane ahead of Max, but...
What is it, undercut?
I can't remember which one's an undercut or overcut. I can't remember the difference. But, yeah, so then we get to lap, what was it? 48. And Lewis was able to pass Lando because when Lewis came out of the pit, he was behind Lando at this point. And he was able to pass Lando. He looked like he was just, like, barreling through there.
Well, I will say...
Lewis had pace.
The top 3 all had pace. The top
at different times throughout the race.
But they were consistently moving away from everyone else.
Yes.
They didn't have, it's not like Lando had Charles, coming up behind him.
No.
It was very much like Lando was walking away from 4th place. Lewis was walking away from Lando and Max, So I will say, while Lando did get past, he was still,
it felt like the 3 of them were competing against each other.
Yeah.
And then Charles was in the mix sometimes.
Yeah.
Every once in a while. But, yeah, Lewis was able to pass Lando at lap 48, and Lewis had a really good grip. And just, at that point, he actually had the best pace because Lewis had faster lap times than Max. And that's kind of how it was for the rest of the race. But he was so far back that he wasn't able to fully catch Max. I think if there were 5 more laps, Lewis would have won.
I think we saw that panic. I think we
you could heard it. And Max's
and it was funny because you heard this panic or honestly frustration. And I think panic is too strong. I think you saw this kind of like, holy crap. Because I think, yes, Max was dealing with his braking issue, but I also think, he had to put in the work.
Well, I think it's also probably not even frustration, but like the exhaustion, because when he's super far out ahead, he doesn't have to put as much into the race, like energy-wise, because he can kind of just keep it there and move along.
And perfect the circuit.
Yeah, where when he's being chased down, you have to, like, it's like your ass
that
on fire.
Adrenaline.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you heard that, and then Lewis was
just like, I need this.
Self-motivating, like,
It was funny. And then at this point, actually, Fernando retired because of some floor problems.
So frustrating. What was it, lap 50?
Yeah, there was like 2 laps.
Oh my God.
There was a couple laps left. You just see him retire, and it was like, oh no.
Yeah.
I do not want to be in that room with him afterwards.
I just think it's a bummer from where Aston Martin started to now 100%. where they've gone. I think maybe it isn't as much of a bummer as it should be because they came in with a really strong car, but they just haven't been able to keep up.
Yeah.
And I think
their upgrades have gone the opposite direction that they were hoping.
Yeah, and I don't know, maybe they're just trying some weird, funky things, but
I think they're figuring out what doesn't work.
Yeah.
Until they figure out what does.
Well, hopefully it works sooner or later.
But the end of the race, the podium ended up being Max P1. So this was his 50th race win, his 15th of this season. Lewis was in second.
Who was also closing the gap at the end.
Yes, like I said before, if there were a couple more laps, I think Lewis would have won.
Yeah.
Which is wild. And then P3 was Lando. Carlos at one point started to close in a bit on Lando, and then I think Lando heard on the radio that Carlos was about to close in 4 seconds behind.
Yeah.
But he was starting to catch up, and the McLaren just didn't have as much pace at this point, and I think Lando was like, I need a podium, and just moved as fast as possible. And so there was still about like a 3 to 4 second gap between Lando and Carlos in the end. But, yeah. But what we talked about earlier and how...
But wait, there's more.
Yeah. So, later on in the day on Sunday, after the podium had happened, after the champagne had been sprayed, and everything had been packed up...
after the trophies had been handed and the press conferences had been happened.
Yes. The cars, when they were in Parc Fermé, the cars that were... looked at were the podium placers and then Charles Leclerc. And while this was going on, they found out that there were some irregularities in Lewis's and Charles's cars. So by irregularities, there was high wear on the skid pads. So on the floor of the car, there are they're called skid pads. They're supposed to wear down throughout the race. Apparently, they wore down too much.
Yeah, there's a certain amount of inches that they can't get any smaller.
Yes.
And they were an inch under or something.
Yeah. And so because of that, they were referred to the stewards and the FIA, and they were actually both disqualified from the race. I think that also means possibly they were disqualified from the sprint as well. I don't know. But so because of that, the entire results order was completely shifted. So the podium ended up being Max, Lando, and Carlos.
We saw Logan Sargent
got his first
points because of this.
It's very bittersweet because Lewis raced one hell of a race and deserved a podium. And I did see several comments made where it was like, well, if 2 out of the 4 cars y'all looked at had some irregularities, why didn't you take a moment to look at more cars? Because I highly doubt it was just those 2.
I just think, especially, so there was an announcement made before the Grand Prix this weekend. So the maximum amount of fines that drivers can get in a Grand Prix weekend is 250. I believe it's pounds or euros.
I think it's dollars.
It's 250,000, so a quarter of $1 million of one of those 3 currencies. They've just raised it 75%. So a driver can be fined a maximum of $1 million a race.
We don't know where the money goes.
We don't know where the money goes. Not every single driver
has the money for that.
Has the money because you have drivers like Kevin Magnussen was asked about this, and he said, Charles can sell his watch. Me, I have to go disappear for a really long time.
Can you imagine Logan Sargent having to cough up $1 million? I'm sorry, no.
No, and so there's that issue. Financially, you're asking for this exorbitant amount of money, and then 2 of your most prolific, 2 of your most beloved and probably the 2 wealthiest drivers. Yes. If not in the top 5.
Definitely, I think Max is up there. I think Max might be one of the top now. But Lewis is definitely...
But to sit there and to disqualify, and I know that the 2 are definitely not related. They're not related at all. But it just felt, the FIA is under fire. A lot of people weren't happy with the race conditions in Qatar. And then to sit there and to not look at every single car.
And I get, in part from it, they typically don't look at every single car.
No, and I understand that.
If 50% of the cars that y'all did look at had some problems, maybe take a look at a couple more cars to see if anybody else is having this problem. Because then it might have been a track issue and not their team's, I don't know.
So, I have a question, and I don't know if this is something... We haven't gone over this, but... Because the drivers have to weigh in.
Yeah.
Does every single driver have to weigh in?
Yeah. Before and after every
So, if you're making them doing that, if you're already finding some major flaw, you just do all the freaking cars.
Yeah.
I don't know. It was just... It was like a huge dampener on the weekend, and...
But the funniest part of today is Monday... Lewis and Charles
together
did a post together on Instagram of them at the post-race conference, or what was it?
It was like the press conference. It might have been
it was one of the press conferences from the weekend, and it's them sitting on the couch, both looking miserable, and they posted it, and just the caption was "mood."
Yeah, it was good.
Yeah,
it was good.
It was a ridiculous situation, and I think. I don't know. I have my conspiracy theories, but...
So here's my question. What does disqualifying do? Especially for something like that. You
don't get the points.
No. I know that. But I'm saying, what's the lesson learned? Because that is something that's completely out of their control. That is erosion. That's like saying, the Grand Canyon doesn't have enough canyons. That is just, it's naturally... So what is the lesson we learned from this disqualification? That's what I'm not really understanding. Yeah. And maybe it's because I'm brand spanking new to this world, but I don't understand what... Now, I would understand a fine, like, hey, this is for safety, you know? Well, like, a part of your car could have flown off or something.
I did see someone make a comment about how one of the reasons why their skid pads might have eroded more and might have been under the regulations is because of the fact it was a sprint weekend.
No, yeah, I know that. I've seen that too. But I'm just saying how... I feel like disqualification is like suspending or expelling someone. But it's just... I don't know. I don't understand what the justification is. And I struggle to understand the severity of that call.
Yeah, same.
So...
But we are going to close up and give our final thoughts.
Yeah.
I think the main takeaway of this weekend really was what happened on Sunday night with the disqualification. I feel like that's the only thing I can now remember of the whole weekend because it feels like Lewis's fight didn't even matter at that point. I mean, it did, but it didn't because it showed the pace of Mercedes and the potential that they might be able to do well for the rest of the season. But also, like, they've just had a rough go. Like, Charles and Lewis, I feel like, when will they know peace?
Well, it's funny. I feel like the way they're going to spin this in, like, their positive, like... We can't talk badly about the FIA. We're going to spin this positively.
I don't think they're, like, legally allowed
they're
to
literally
talk
not.
About the FIA.
I feel like they'll be like, well, unfortunately, we were disqualified, but we got all that data. Like, they're going to be like, data. And
yeah.
I don't know.
You know Charles is going to say something like that, and you know Lewis will start off saying something like that, and then we'll say something, like, underhanded about the FIA.
Or he'll go on this really, like, Baby Yoda kind of, like, 100%. Deep-rooted wisdom of, like, but underneath it, there's so many layers that you're like, what do you really mean, Lewis?
Yeah, I feel like he does do that a lot.
Yeah. I think it might be, like, his soft-spokenness. He's like a siren.
He is.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it put a dampener on the weekend. I think, like, all regulation kind of referee society, whatever they're called, the FIA, FIFA, these organizations...
They have a lot of power.
I don't know. I just think it was weird. Now, again, and I know we've said this, like, 9 times this week, we are new, so I'm curious what other instances, similar situations have happened. I still cannot... really fully understand the takeaway.
I have conspiracy theories about all of this, to be honest. Do you want me to throw one out there?
I mean, if it's, like, safe for the general public.
What do you mean by safe?
I don't know. Like, if it's going to be something, like, absolutely crazy, like...
No. So, Lewis coming P2 and Checo coming P6 or whatever... I think Lewis would have almost passed him or if not been, like, closing in. I'm convinced with the power of Red Bull, like...
Oh, so you think it was to save Checo's standings?
Yeah.
That's your theory.
That makes sense. Max didn't have a skid pad problem.
I just don't get it.
Neither do I. But
now that is a conspiracy theory, so do not sit there and...
I'm just trying to think of any possible reason why they would focus on this one specific thing and not look at other cars. Like, if 50% of the cars had a problem that you looked at, it would only be logical to check and see if this was consistent across the grid.
Yeah,
But why didn't they check? That's my question.
I think, for me, I'm just still stuck on, like that, it just doesn't make sense. Like, that is such an extreme to have taken.
That's the thing that doesn't make sense to me, the skid pads. I've had people say to me that they don't understand why the FIA is focusing on track limits. I kind of understand the track limits. We were rowers in a past life, and the concept of, like, track limits is, like, the same as staying in your lane on the water, and I can't even, like, if it's either you're in the lane or you're out the lane, and that is, like, you just can't do it.
Well, and I think track limits, we've seen issues. We've seen circuits correct them. Like, they've tried to make corrections because the cars are different. Yeah. And I get track limits because it is something that it's giving a little bit of an advantage every time you do it. But the disqualification for something that they literally have no control over is something I'm going to struggle to understand. I probably won't ever understand.
Yeah. Again, at the end of the day, our American homeboy got his first F1 points. It was really funny going onto Instagram after all of this had been announced because Lando had edited the 3 on his trophy to a 2.
Covered up one of his fingers
and
with
then
white.
Logan Sargent posted a selfie from the plane being like, "Woo! First points in F1!" And all the comments are like, "Bro."
Maybe on a technicality.
You still got points.
You know what?
He did finish P12 before it. He had a good drive. Yeah. I will give that to him. He had a good race this weekend. And that means both Alex and Logan finished in the points. Mm-hmm. So that was very exciting for Williams. Who else did really well? I feel like those are the only people I could really think about.
I think Carlos did well-ish.
Well, he ended up on the podium.
I mean, he did fine. Like, I just feel like we were so focused on the top 3 because it was such a strategy game. And I will say, this weekend was a lot of fun to watch in the sense of, like, we had to think. Like, I feel like we were sitting on the couch strategizing.
Like, who's going to pit when? Like, who's got a 1-stop or a 2-stop? So.
And I think that's a moment where I was like, oh my God, we've grown. We understand the sport more.
I think that's really everything that I have, honestly.
Yeah. Mexico is in, like, 3 days.
3 days.
I'm excited because I think we're going to get a lot of sassy content post all of this drama llama. Yes. I'm excited. Mexico is probably one of the coolest courses that I've done research on. There's like a freaking baseball stadium in the middle of it.
I'm excited.
You know. And another thing I just wanted to end on. Now, there's speculation on whether people were booing at Max or Greg Abbott. And I'm not going to say anything about Greg Abbott.
I didn't see that at all.
Yeah. There's a lot of people talking about the booing that was happening when Max was being awarded his trophy. Checo. And I just think, you know, at the end of the day, these are people who we enjoy. We use this sport as an escapism.
We don't know these people.
There's no reason, even though we're spectators, to have bad sportsmanship.
Oh, yeah.
And whether it was booing at Max or someone else, I don't know. Just remember, this is something that brings us all together and we all enjoy.
I firmly believe at the end of the day, we don't know any of these people. We can comment on the race and we can comment on the things that we've seen in the media about them and stuff like that. We don't know actually any of these people.
PR personalities are real.
I find it to be, we don't have the right to have a strong hatred enough to boo someone when we don't even know them.
Well, and it's harder in this sport because you're not booing a whole team. You're booing one person. And so, I don't know, just food for thought. Remember, this brings us all together. We do it because it's exciting. We really enjoy learning about it. Yeah. We want to bring, you know, as much knowledge to you guys as possible in our weird, kooky way. But, I don't know. There's a lot of crap going on in the world, so no reason to boo. Just be happy.
At the end of the day, you may hate that Max wins everything, but at the end of the day, he's winning everything for a reason.
Someone's going to beat him eventually, guys.
Yeah,
like,
there's no way he can't win everything.
He cannot keep going like this.
So.
But, yeah, well.
On that note,
we will talk to you guys in a few days, and I'm sure we will bring all the details.
We do have a Get Ready episode from Mexico coming out probably on Thursday.
Yeah, very exciting. We're talking about one of the brothers that the circuit is actually named after. Mm-hmm. So go listen in if you want to have a little bit of Mexican F1 history. So very, very cool, fun things.
Yeah, and as always, make sure to like, subscribe, go follow us on Instagram and TikTok.
Watch us on YouTube. We have a YouTube.
Yes, watch us on YouTube. I think that's everything.
Yeah.
Alrighty, guys. We'll see y'all later.
Talk
Bye.
to you soon.